Welcome everybody. Welcome those of you here and the ones online. We have a big audience today. Even the raining is not very good for this kind of events. Thank you, especially William Chislett, for being here today for this event organized together with the British Spanish Society, which President Jimmy Burns is here and is going to be the chair of this event. So I'm not going to introduce you, William, as Jimmy will do the introductions, and I'm kind of sick, so today I'm going to wear my mask. So just want to give the floor to Jimmy. Thank you very much to be here, and again to the online guests, welcome, and please join our future events that you can check in our online in the website. William will be tomorrow in Cheltenham Festival, sold out again as today. So congratulations on the literary festival. Thank you very much. Jimmy, please.
Good evening, all of you. I've met, or I know quite a few of you already, and you're all good friends. I'm Jimmy Burns, for those of you who don't know. Jimmy Burns Malañón. I'm an Anglo-Spaniard, and I'm the chair of the British Spanish Society, and I'm delighted to be co-hosting this joint event. I wanted to thank you all who made the effort to come, and those joining us on a live stream. I wanted to first of all thank my own team, Cristina Alvarez Campana, our head of events, and Lisa Chambers, our secretary, who worked very hard on our side to make this happen, and of course to Victor for always being such a generous host and friend. I thought I'd sort of just say a few words about the agreement that the British Spanish Society have with the Cervantes, which is an important agreement. The Cervantes Institute, as you know, has existed for a long time. The British Spanish Society is a charity, and we go back to 1916. But obviously we've evolved since then. About 4 years ago is actually sort of the energy coming out of, if you can call it that, post-COVID. We started working, and Cristina and I worked very hard on it with the then director of the Cervantes, Ignacio Peiró, to have an annual lecture, the British Spanish Society Cervantes Institute lecture. And this is the, if I recall rightly, is the third lecture. I will introduce William in a second, but he comes in noble steps, or in the steps of noble predecessors. Our first year we had Fernando Armisto, Professor Fernando Armisto, who hugely eminent Hispanist, Oxford, talking about Magallanes, his new book on Magallanes. And the following year, in fact last year, we had Enrique Moradellos, who again is one of the great Hispanist historians, educated actually or mentored by Paul Preston, who has always been a huge mentor to many of us, historians and Hispanists. I now come to William. William and me, I wanted to give it a personal touch apart from anything. I mean, William and me go back, as they say, a long way. We've known each other as friends and professionally for over 40 years. That kind of loyal friendship and collegiality is sometimes rare, often a treasure, and I feel a huge privilege to have known William. We go back to when we were both working for the Financial Times, which I joined in 1978, and we coincided in Lisbon, Madrid, and in Latin America. Then William moved, I stayed with the FT, he moved to the Times, so he didn't do badly there.
The other way around.
Oh, it was the other way, so you came from the Times and came to the FT. But post-FT, William very successfully marked out a very exemplary career in Madrid with the Instituto Elcano as a fellow there, the equivalent of a fellow, writing very, very incisive pieces and articles and reports, not just for the Elcano, but a whole range of institutions about Spanish politics, society, where was Spain, where was it going, and the theme of today's lecture. And he's also been, I'm sure he'll be grateful for me mentioning this. I think that the real sign and of an excellent kind of researcher, someone passionate about Spain and its history, is picking out someone that may have been forgotten by too many people. And it's thanks to William that the figure of Arturo Barea was resurrected from almost oblivion. It was thanks to William that Balea's works were published for the first time in Spain. It was thanks to William that a commemorative stone was put out to him in Farringdon in London, a plaque on his favourite pub, the Volunteer, a rather good name given that Barea was working for the Republic in the Civil War, and also made sure that the Madrid government or municipalities have agreed to have a square in his name, bearing his name. And of course, William sought post-Brexit, as several people we know, Brits we know, Spanish nationality. We didn't get into a big dialectic about why I decided to stay as a Brit, despite having been born in Madrid and having a Spanish mother. But it certainly wasn't because I voted for Brexit, as most people who know me. It was simply because I had this sort of sentimental thing about Burke and all the sort of great philosophers behind British democracy, and still retaining a huge respect for the country of my birth. But that's enough of me, and I'm delighted to introduce William, and I'm sure because we've done gigs together, it'll be worth your while. And over to you, William.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I thank the organisers. I have a fruitful relationship with the Cervantes, having created in 2018 an exhibition on Barea and spoken in the Institute's branches in London, where Michael Portillo presented in 2013 a book of mine on Spain. I've spoken many times in Madrid, also in Manchester, Dublin, and most recently in Tetuan, Morocco. Next year, I hope I will be curating an exhibition on British travel writers on Spain, a smaller version of which will probably come to London, or London will have its own exhibition. And I'm a member of the British Spanish Society, whose chairman, Jimmy, is an old friend and colleague. When I was based in Mexico City for the Financial Times in the 1980s, Jimmy was in Buenos Aires for the FT. Furthermore, I have British and Spanish nationalities, the latter since 2021 by royal decree, a rather privileged route. In other words, a decree was issued bearing my name, published in the official state bulletin. The post-Brexit arrangements of that monumentally stupid act of self-harm fully protected me, but various close friends, including Antonio Munoz Molina, kept on asking me why I was not Spanish and offered to be my padrino by the privileged fast-track route. Although being Spanish means I am in the EU queue at airports, unlike my wife, when travelling within the bloc and not stuck in the much longer non-EU queue, like I assume many of you are aware of this, and I can vote in general elections, these advantages, while useful, were not the reason I took out Spanish nationality. It seemed the right thing to do for someone who has lived well over half his life in Spain. And yes, in case anyone asks, I still have and use my UK passport. I had to renounce it, but not surrender it. I came to Heathrow yesterday on my UK passport, and I go back to Madrid on Thursday on my Spanish passport. And all that is perfectly normal, and there's a lot of misconceptions about this, but I won't bore you with it. I've been involved professionally in Spain one way or another ever since I covered the transition to democracy for the Times from 1975 to 1978. I returned to Madrid permanently in 1986 after 6 years in Mexico, also running around Central America and parts of the Caribbean, and a spell at FT HQ in London. I've thus witnessed Spain's profound changes, producing a mixture of admiration and frustration at times. Those who know my work over the last 20 years, since the foundation of the Elcano Royal Institute, will know my penchant, some might say obsession, for statistics. I hope I do not bore you with so many, but in these days of fake news, too many opinions, and not enough objective facts, I feel it is important to be rigorous. Here is my very first statistic. In 1975, I was one of 160,000 foreign-born citizens living in Spain, a mere 0.4% of the total population. Today, I'm one of almost 9 million, 18% of the population. The respective figures for the UK are 10.7 million people of foreign-born origin, which is 16% of the population. So in relative terms, Spain has a higher foreign population, but not in absolute terms. Spain's average life expectancy in 1975, when I beached up in Madrid, was 73 years. Today it is 84, some 3 years higher than the UK's. Whichever way one looks at it, Spain has been profoundly transformed since the 1978 democratic constitution that sealed the end of the 36-year Franco dictatorship, be it economically, with, for example, the creation of a large number of multinationals, Santander, for example, or the world's second largest tourism industry in terms of visitors, politically, with a vibrant democracy that ranks relatively high in classifications, socially, with the greatly improved status of women, or in foreign policy, where Spain has reclaimed its place on the international stage. The country bears absolutely no resemblance to what it was like 50 years ago. Informed Spaniards look aghast at Brexit's impact and the UK's manifest decline, for which Brexit is only partly to blame. And I can stick my neck out and say Brexit is not going to happen in Spain. Given that 4 ministers and all past prime ministers sit on the Elcano's board of trustees, perhaps I should make it clear that I'm speaking in a purely personal capacity. Spain today faces a host of difficult challenges, some of them not new, but becoming more urgent. 7 years after the unconstitutional and failed Catalan independence referendum in 2017, the disruptive and divisive secession movement has lost momentum and support, but it is not over. I will look at this later. The economy has recovered its pre-COVID pandemic level of economic output, albeit much later than other EU countries, but the unemployment rate, under 12%, the lowest since 2008, compared to the UK's 4%, is still double the EU average. Productivity growth is sluggish, R&D spending is very low, and the high public debt and structural budget deficit makes Spain very vulnerable to external shocks. Incidentally, last week, the European Fiscal Board berated the European Commission for exercising undue largesse in forgiving Spain for its high deficit last year. It said Spain should have been deemed to have an excessive deficit alongside France, Italy and Romania, which were punished, but Spain wasn't punished. The sustainability of the relatively generous state pension system in a country with a fast ageing population and one of the world's highest average life expectancies is under increasing pressure. In education, the early school leaving rate, almost 14% of kids between 16 and 24 years old had left school last year, having completed only their basic secondary education. And the percentage of secondary school students who repeat a year remains far too high, although far from the levels of 15 years ago. Spain's education attainment is lopsided. At the high end of the spectrum, just over half of people aged between 25 and 34 have a university degree or vocational qualification, well above the OECD average of 47%. And at the low end, 1/4 of the same age group had not completed the last 2 years of secondary education, far higher than the average. There's a serious overqualification and mismatch among university graduates, the brightest or boldest of whom seek to emigrate if they cannot fulfill their job aspirations. Needless to say, Brexit has screwed that somewhat. Spain, because many of them like to come to the UK. Spain's overqualification rate is the highest in the EU. It's a difficult, I won't bore you with how it's calculated, but basically what I'm saying is that far too many people come out with degrees and the job they find is something that a degree was not needed at all. The deep divide between the generally poor living standards of young adults, those of my children's age more or less, and a relatively more comfortable life of the elderly is generating worrying intergenerational friction. Spain is also being hit hard by climate change, with abnormally sweltering temperatures, even in the least expected months, and dramatic bouts of drought. Almost 3/4 of the land in Spain is likely to be affected by desertification. Coastal areas are extremely vulnerable to rising sea levels. As if these problems were not enough, resolving them is in the hands of a government and a highly polarised and fragmented political class that is frequently identified by the state pollster CIS as one of the country's main problems. Spain had 5 general elections between December 2015 and July 2023. 5. In the preceding 36 years, it had 10 elections. The 2015 election was a watershed. The 33-year domination of political life by the Socialists and the Popular Party was significantly eroded that year when 2 upstate parties, the at the time centrist Ciudadanos and the hard-left Podemos and its allies, won 1/3 of the vote and a bit less than 1/3 of the seats in Parliament. The combined vote share of the Socialists and the PP, the 2 main parties that have alternated in power over the last 40 years or more, dropped from a high of 84% in 2008 to 51% in 2015. It's come back a little since then. There is a theory that eventually we'll be back to the 2-party system. I doubt that. At the heart of this erosion of the 2-party system was anger at a long succession of corruption scandals in the PP and the Socialist Party, particularly the former. There was also the impact of a long recession, following the spectacular bursting of a property bubble in 2008 and the unconstitutional referendum in Catalonia. The election in April 2019 saw the entry, further complicating the political panorama, of the hard-right Vox, further fragmenting the political scene. And in the 2023 election, Ciudadanos, which had gradually been losing votes, threw in the towel and did not run. The socialist-led minority government that emerged from the inconclusive election last year, with the hard-left Sumar as the new junior partner, replacing Podemos, depends for its survival on a fragile parliamentary support from Basque nationalists and separatists, 1 MP from the Canary Islands and 2 pro-independence Catalan parties. It was only formed after Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez agreed a controversial and divisive amnesty for some 400 people involved in the illegal Catalan referendum. He said this was a red line he would never cross and justified it on the grounds of making a virtue of necessity. I won't get in too much into amnesty because there are arguments in favour and against. What I can say is that in the 10 months of the current government, basically the only law that has gone through Parliament is the amnesty law, nothing else. Governing Spain has become very complex. We will move forward determinedly, with or without the help of the legislature, Sanchez said last month. More than a declaration of dictatorship, as his opponents claim, it was a recognition of the government's embattled position. The amnesty has taken up an inordinate amount of the government's energies. The maximalists Together for Catalonia, as opposed to the more pragmatic Republican left of Catalonia, is a particularly unreliable supporter of the government and could pull the plug any day. With Vox, strange as it may sound, as the socialists' best ally, however, it is difficult to see how the PP will return to power without the hard right's support, which in turn would probably trigger the formation of another government like the present one. We will see. For example, the Basque Nationalist Party, which has supported both PP and socialist governments in the past. There's now so much bad blood between Vox and the Basque Nationalist Party. Difficult to see how the Basque Nationalist Party would support, if support was needed, a PP government if the Vox was involved in it. After all, Vox has said that it doesn't believe in the autonomy system and doesn't believe in the special financing deal that the Basque country has with Madrid. Tackling the problems and structural challenges for the greater good requires broad consensus across the political divide if laws and reforms are to be effective and not be overturned when a different party takes office, which has been the case for a good number of years. More than 80% of Spaniards, according to the private pollster Metroscopia, would like to return to the spirit of compromise during the transition to democracy. Cooperation across the political divide is now so rare that when it does occur, it is widely celebrated and reported. As for instance, in January of this year, when the Socialists and the PP, the two main parties still, voted together to remove the word handicapped from the Constitution and replace it with persons with a disability. I have no wish to cause offence, but that issue is hardly the most pressing one in Spain. The only example of cooperation. Such is the animosity, fiercer than that between previous prime ministers and the leader of the opposition, that Sanchez and PP leader Alberto Feijóo hardly speak to one another, if at all, which is perhaps not surprising, though bad for Spain's political health, as Sanchez dislodged the last PP government and became prime minister in 2018 for the first time, after winning a vote of no confidence against Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy over corruption and this is important, garnering a parliamentary majority for him to be Prime Minister. In Spain, winning a vote of non-confidence is not sufficient to replace the government. At the same time that you present your vote of no confidence, you have to present a candidate to be the next Prime Minister, which Sanchez did by rallying around with him a highly disparate group of political parties. The discourse in Parliament is virulently aggressive, much more so than in the UK Parliament. Political leaders treat their rivals not as adversaries, but as enemies of the nation. This led one MP recently, representing the tiny Canary Island coalition, to ask, and I quote her, "Why do you hate one another so much?" With a notable exception of Catalonia, Spanish society is not ideologically radicalized to anywhere near the same extent as the political class over a whole range of issues. The average ideological self-placement of voters, which puts voters where they stand on a political spectrum, has moved over the past 40 years between a minimum of 4.5 and a maximum of 5, where 5 is the centre, 0 is extreme left, and 10 is extreme right. Emblematic of the failure of the PP and the ruling socialists to reach consensus was the long-running saga over renewing the General Council of the Judiciary, a highly important body which makes judicial appointments and oversees the system. The 5-year mandate for the Council's 20 members, which began when the PP was last in power, expired in December 2018, but new members were not appointed until June of this year, and only after mediation by the EU Commission to break the deadlock. Incidentally, as a result of that 5-year basically non-functioning of the Council, around 100 judicial appointments could not be made, which you can imagine in a justice system that works very slowly, even at the best of times, really clogged things up. The two parties, PP Socialists, appointed, this is how they got out of the problem, appointed 10 new members each and were charged with agreeing a new council president by a 3/5 majority and hammering out by the same majority changes to the law under which the council is formed and submitting them for absolute majority to the Congress and the Senate. The council's new president was chosen very recently, but only just within the deadline. The PP's reluctance to renew the council was based, it was up to the PP to agree. Without apportioning blame, one can say that the main obstacle to this 5-year impasse was the PP, because it was in the opposition, and normally these things are done relatively easily. So its reluctance, why was it against renewing the council? Because it didn't like the appointment method, which they said was not in accordance with generally accepted EU standards, though it was happy to keep this system when it and not the socialists were in power, and moreover had an opportunity to change the system, but it didn't. The European Commission and the Council of Europe want at least half of the Council members to be designated by judges under the new system, which Parliament has to agree, as it might make the body more independent. There's no guarantee, however, that this will happen. The other serious judicial problem, and one which citizens feel more acutely, rather than getting bound up in the technical details of renewing the council, is the snail's pace at which the judiciary works, exemplified by the enormous backlog of cases at the end of each year. This is due to gross understaffing. Spain has an average of 5 judges per 100,000 citizens. The EU average is 18. And its IT systems leave a lot to be desired. In many parts of Spain, it's all paper-based, not computer-based. Public trust in Spain's government and in Parliament is among the lowest in the 27 EU countries. 9 out of every 10 Spaniards distrust the political parties, well above the EU average, according to Eurobarometer. This stems from public dissatisfaction with the way government functions or does not function, and an impression that the quality of Spain's democracy is in decline. The country, however, was still classified as a full democracy, though only just, in the latest Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index, ahead of the United States, which was classified as a flawed democracy. Problems in Spain include the colonization by politicians of state institutions and companies, the overuse of decree laws, which obviate the need for parliamentary debate and are supposed to be reserved for exceptional circumstances, corruption that is perceived to be relatively high, political pressure on the judiciary, and the closed party list system to elect MPs. Under the closed party list, candidates are elected in the order in which they appear on the voting list, and it's the party's leadership that decides which number you are on the list. These closed party lists give excessive power to a party's apparatus at the expense of accountability, making MPs beholden to the leadership and stifling independent and minority opinion and debate within the party's ranks. There's an expression which Jimmy will probably understand, which goes something like, si te mueves en el foto no sales, which actually was coined by a Mexican politician, which basically means if you step out of line, you definitely will not be an MP next time round. One of the things I admire a lot about the British Parliament is the independence that MPs have here. In Spain and many other countries that use that system, they're a bit like sheep. No one steps out of line. As well as colonising institutions, the two main parties, when in power, indulge in cronyism to an excessive degree, appointing friends, political allies and people to whom favours are owed to posts in an array of state-owned companies, ranging from Correos, the postal office, postal service, and Renfe, the railway company, to Paradores, the marvellous chain of hotels, and EFE, the news agency, rather than much better qualified people. And both parties do it. They're equally to blame. Political affiliation also plays far too much of a role in staffing the civil service, particularly among the legion of central and regional government advisors. In view of 9 distinguished academics who recently and collectively published a book called España, Democracia Menguante, Spain Diminishing Democracy, Spain is moving from what they call a parliamentary monarchy with a division of powers to a kind of presidentialist parliamentarism. They also perceive what they call a desbordamiento constitucional, constitutional overflow in some areas such as over Catalonia. This rather unwieldy term means that the government exercises its authority or makes decisions that go beyond or border the limits established by the Constitution. Without a greater degree of consensus among the main political parties, the Constitution of 1978 is not functioning as well as it should. Incidentally, Spain's Constitution of 1978, if my mathematics is correct, will be the oldest the country has had next year. They've never had a constitution that's lasted so long. It will outdo the one of 74, which were ended in the early 1920s. Meanwhile, the Senate, constitutionally defined as a chamber of territorial representation, is not fulfilling its role. It needs to be reformed along the lines of Germany's Bundesrat. It comprises 265 members, 57 of whom are appointed by the 17 regional governments. So there's no elections for these guys, they're just appointed by the regional parliaments. And the rest by popular vote. The Senate has limited legislative powers and has become what we all regard as an elephant's graveyard, where the two main parties park second-tier politicians. A reformed Senate, together with a more clearly defined division of powers between the central government and the regional governments, could go some way towards diffusing the independence movements in Catalonia and the Basque Country. Spain's public administration is still needlessly opaque. Franco's archaic official secrets law of 1968, which allowed for classified information to be kept secret forever if deemed necessary, remains in force. Hasn't been changed. I noticed that amongst this government's proposals to regenerate democracy, as they call it, is to finally produce a modern official secrets law. We shall see. Proposals to reform it have yet to be approved by Parliament. In a country with more than its fair share of nepotism, there's also still no effective system. Oh, sorry. That's probably a Pedro Sanchez. In a country with more its fair share of nepotism, there's still no effective system to deal with conflicts of interest of politicians' families and spouses, along the lines, for example, of the UK's Office of Propriety and Ethics. Instead, there's an outdated Office of Conflicts, whose lack of independence and autonomy is constantly criticised by the EU and the Council of Europe. A proper ethics system would have prevented an ongoing problem that arose in April. Prime Minister Sanchez, understandably upset by a court's decision to investigate his wife for alleged influence peddling in a case brought by the extreme right Manos Limpios, clean hands, and hounded by the press, she was hounded by the press, cancelled his public duties for a few days in order to consider resigning. He didn't, as we all know. Not only is Spain out of line with advanced countries in matters of conflict of interest, but it does not even have a ministerial code of ethics or legislation on lobbies or rules limiting the use of ministerial houses or official aeroplanes. There's also no grilling of politicians and civil servants by cross-party parliamentary committees, such as those in the UK, or public hearings in the US Congress and Senate. The lawyer Miriam González Durantes, the wife of Nick Clegg, a former UK Deputy Prime Minister, and thus in a similar position to Mrs. Sanchez, pointed all this out in an article in the FT. Turning to the economy, strong growth is back, spurred by a surge in international tourists, a record of more than 85 million last year, the world's second largest number after France. More than 17 million of them were Brits, and is headed towards 100 million this year. Economic growth and job creation are, however, very dependent on buoyant tourism, a key sector, at least 13% of GDP. While in some parts of the country, notably the Canary and Balearic Islands and Malaga, over-tourism is making Spain a victim of its own success. Tourism was responsible for a whopping 80% of Spain's growth last year, and by the same token was the main factor, and we tend to forget this, behind the equally whopping 11% fall in GDP in 2020, the annus horribilis of COVID, which was the steepest fall by far in the EU. So great tourism year, the country hums along. Bad tourism year, the country's in dire straits. The country has also stopped converging in a sustained manner with the rest of the Eurozone in terms of income per capita since 2007, when the global financial crisis began and Spain's massive property bubble started to burst. Local residents in key tourist destinations have taken to the streets calling for a more sustainable tourism model. Young adults are particularly aggrieved at being priced out of the property market as more and more flats and shops are converted into accommodation for exclusive use by tourists. I'm very lucky, I live in a house, a three-storey house in Barrio Salamanca, which most Spaniards say there isn't such a thing as a three-storey house in Barrio Salamanca. Well, there is in one tiny part where I live, and we own the streets as well. In my immediate area of less than half a kilometre, I have witnessed in the last year 6 pastry shops, bars, whatever, turned into tourism flats, just in my immediate area. The rise in the population of more than 8 million since 2000, the year 2000, has far outpaced the increase in the housing stock, particularly the rental segment. This is, I found, a shocking figure. Spain's stock of social rental dwellings, we all know what that means, I assume, is a paltry 1% of its total housing stock, almost the lowest in all the EU OECD countries. In Netherlands, 35% of the housing stock is social rental. In Spain, it is 1%. The proportion of homes owned by those under 35 years old dropped from 15% in 2002 to 7% in 2022, the latest figure. Spaniards leave home, not surprisingly, on average at the age of 30. In the EU average is 26. I know the UK has similar problems, depending which part of the UK we're talking about, particularly the south-southeast. Spain has undergone profound demographic changes in recent decades, which are impacting the economy's growth capacity, labour market dynamics, and public revenue and spending. Both fertility and mortality rates have dropped sharply, but deaths have outnumbered births every year since 2015. Every year, when we get the figures, we note that there are very few births and more deaths. Something that is obviously most keenly seen in the rapid ageing of the population. For example, last year, there were 112,000 more deaths than births. Even more striking, the number of voluntary abortions was 103,000, which represented 1/3 of total births. And almost half of these were women who had never used any form of contraception. This woeful lack of sex education in schools, particularly in the concertadas, where the influence of the Catholic Church is still strong, is, in my view, a national disgrace. When the latest figures were released, a lot of people were shocked. The sustainability of the pension system in its current form is under great pressure. As a result of the very impressive increase in life expectancy at birth, the proportion of the population over the age of 64 has more than doubled since the early 1970s to over 20%. The oldest woman in the world, guess what, who died this year, was a Spaniard, and she was 117. The fertility rate has fallen from 2.8 children per woman when I arrived in Spain in 75 to under 1.3 today, one of the world's lowest, and far short of the 2.1 at which existing population levels would be maintained. I know some of you are going to ask, well, how is the population growing if no one's producing children? Very easily. Over 90% of the increase in population comes from immigrants. Spain has become the EU country with the highest proportion of first-time mothers over the age of 40. 2021, latest figure, 11% of all births were by women over the age of 40. But for the influx of immigrants, Spain's population would have hardly grown over the past 2 decades. The Venezuelan population in Spain tripled between 2018 and 2024, it tripled to more than 500,000 as people fled the autocratic regime. On top of this, and some of these will include Venezuelans, though most of the Venezuelans who come to Madrid, I wouldn't say they're necessarily well-heeled, but they're certainly not poor. Estimated that there are up to 470,000 immigrants in an irregular situation, i.e. without residency permits and other papers, most of them from Latin America. The figure has become so high that a popular petition was successfully raised very recently, which is going to force the Parliament to consider having what they call another regularization. In other words, overnight to give these people papers. We've had several before. There's also been a significant increase in perilous sea crossings from Africa to the Canary Islands by undocumented migrants. More than 24,000 people arrived in the first 8 months of this year, just to the Canary Islands, 115% more than in the same period of last year, and roughly the same number as those who have crossed the English Channel in the same period. The Canary Islands are struggling to cope because they become the main gateway for irregular migration from Africa to the EU. Don't forget, the Canary Islands are closer to Africa than they are to the rest of Spain. Spain is not alone in these demographic changes, but they have been and will be more pronounced. The number of retirees from the baby boom generation, which in Spain was later than in other European countries because of the Civil War. The baby boom generation in Spain is basically people born between 1958 and 1975, will increase significantly in the coming decades and will not be offset by new entrants into the labour market. Remember, those working are basically paying the pensions of people who are eventually going to retire, unless there's another surge in immigrants. Analysis of the pension reforms between 2020 2021 and 2023 points to the system not working. There are obligations that no one knows how they're going to be met on the revenue side. In other words, the revenue is going to be much more than what they're taking in. None of the pension experts that I know of, including the previous Bank of Spain governor, believe the government's latest reforms are going to solve the problem. Interestingly, the new governor, as of last month, was the minister responsible for the reforms. So it'll be interesting to see what he now says. The outgoing governor was quite critical of the government's reform of the pension system, basically saying they weren't sufficient. As regards the green transition, Spain are already quite advanced in the use of renewable energy. Half of electricity last year was generated by different types of renewable energy. But if Spain wants to meet some highly ambitious climate targets over the coming decades, it will require improving and increasing green taxation, an area Spain has raised less revenue than other EU economies. The country is also a laggard in adopting electrical vehicles and in charging points. The tiny Netherlands has 5 times more charging points than Spain. 3 years this month after negotiations began between the EU and the UK on Gibraltar's post-Brexit deal to continue free movement over the Spain-Gibraltar border and tackle other issues, there is still no agreement, despite endless positive statements from the 18 meetings. The ROC, as you probably know, voted overwhelmingly against Brexit. There is no deadline for an agreement, although the prospect of the introduction of automation at EU borders next month, which I gather that the EU is not going to delay, brings some urgency to the talks, amid fears that it could lead to severe disruption at the frontier, which is crossed every day from Spain by around 15,000 people working in Gibraltar, plus countless tourists. It's obviously not going to happen, but imagine if those 15,000 people, for whatever reason, could not cross into Gibraltar, the economy of the ROC will quite literally collapse, particularly the hospital, where most of the nurses are Spanish. I have divided loyalties over Gibraltar, as I was married there when the border with Spain was closed. My wife is Catholic, I'm Church of England. We got married in 1974. So last year, the Franco regime. A non-Catholic married Catholic was very difficult, but not impossible, as we later learned. Pepe Varela told me how I could have solved the problem, which I'll mention in a minute. So how did we get to Gibraltar? We took the overnight train to Algeciras. We took the ferry to Tangiers. We took the ferry from Tangiers to Gibraltar, and we went back exactly the same way, because the ferry was going into dry dock literally the next day, and we would have been stranded in Gibraltar, where the only way to get back would be to fly through London, which was totally nuts. So we didn't do that. Pepe Varela told me, someone Jimmy knows well, that what my wife should have done was to have gone to a notary and renounced her Catholic faith, and had she done that, we could have then had a civil wedding. But we didn't know that at the time. Another complex challenge is to create a national museum on the Civil War and on the Franco dictatorship. While Spain has been slow to confront a recent past that has conditioned and continues to condition society, and one can understand why, compared with, for example, Germany, the German Historical Museum in Berlin, which I visited, even has a section on the bombing of Guernica during the Civil War by the Luftwaffe. Spain doesn't have anything like that. Spain is not alone in taking time to address past conflicts, and it is far more difficult to address a civil war than a war. A war is pretty well, we know who the common enemy is. The Civil War? We don't. For example, the 1861 to 65 American Civil War Museum, formed from the merger of the American Civil War Center and the Museum of the Confederacy, was only established during the Obama administration in 2013. Crafting a narrative acceptable to the left and right in today's highly polarized politics requires an immense effort. Whereas there's little argument over who is the common enemy when a country goes to war against another nation or nations, this is not the case in a civil war that pits neighbours against one another and sometimes families, and where the narrative of why and what happened is monopolised by the winning side. I have left Catalonia to the end. The region is returning to a semblance of normality as a result of the weakening of the pro-independence movement, epitomised by the advent of the pro-union socialist government in Catalonia recently, breaking the 14-year-long hold on Catalan power by separatist parties. Symbols can often say much more than words. Soon after the new government took office in August in Barcelona, it restored the Spanish flag to the Generalitat Palace, the ancient heart of the region's government, and Salvador Illa, the Catalan president, greeted King Felipe when he visited Barcelona. All of you might say, well, big deal. Well, here it comes. Per Aragonés, the previous Republican left Catalan president, not only did not display the Spanish flag along with the Catalan flag, contravening the law, but no action was taken, but also avoided, during his 3 years in office, having to formally greet King Felipe by boycotting the monarch's official visits to Catalonia. Illa, however, did not display the Spanish flag in the ceremony when he took over from Aragonés, whose support was needed to form a government and so avert a fresh election. But he did restore the flag when he met the socialist mayor of Barcelona, and the flag is still there. The socialists won the most seats and the most votes in May's snap regional election in Catalonia. They won 42 of the 135 seats, 9 more than in 2021, on 28% of the vote. But this was far from the 68 seats needed to govern on their own. The Catalan version of their ally at the national level, the hard-left Sumar, won 6 seats. Still don't have enough to form a government on their own. Together for Catalonia, led by the madman Puigdemont, and the Republican left, the previous holder of power in Catalonia, which are the 2 main separatist parties, are at loggerheads. And they didn't obtain enough seats either to govern, thank God. Including the anti-capitalist Popular Unity candidacy and a new party, the separatist hard-right Catalan Alliance, yes, a hard-right pro-independence party, these captured 61 seats, 13 down on 2021. Also not possible. So, how was the government formed? The Republican left had to strike a deal with the socialists. Incidentally, the total votes for pro-independence parties have dropped in regional elections, have dropped from just over 2 million in 2017, the year of the illegal referendum, to 1.3 million today, a loss of 700,000 votes, which have gone to the socialists and the PP mainly. The unionist political right also did well in May's Catalan election. Popular Party won 15 seats, won 11% of the votes. This was 12 more than it had won in the previous election in 2021, while the hard-right Vox held on to its 11 seats. This, thus, is the complex political panorama in Catalonia. Republican left, pro-independence, but it is quite a bit more pragmatic than Puigdemont's Together for Catalonia, still led by Puigdemont, who remains in self-imposed exile in Belgium, agreed to back Illa, as I've mentioned. This was Sanchez's second concession to Catalan nationalism, first the amnesty, and now what they call a singular financing deal which is yet to be spelled out exactly what it means, but the reports written so far on the rather scanty information imply that Catalonia is going to get a deal not dissimilar to the one that the Basque Country has, which is raising the heckles in the PP and among some of the socialist regional barons. Not that there are many these days because they didn't do well in the elections. Of course, a third concession by the central government after the amnesty and this new financing deal, which I say was the price of not having another election in Catalonia, which would probably won't change anything at all. A third concession would be a binding referendum on Catalan independence, which I really believe is not going to happen. And if it did, in my humble view, would be a referendum held throughout Spain and not just in Catalonia. Puigdemont was accompanied, you may have read, he came back secretly. He's quite a good escape artist, as our old Puigdemont. Was accompanied by Josep Rull, who is the Together for Catalonia president of the Catalan parliament. In other words, Puigdemont's key man in Barcelona is the president of the Catalan parliament, not someone from the other pro-independence party, which is backing the socialists returning to power in Catalonia. Returned to Barcelona on the day of the investiture of the new government, despite a pending warrant for his arrest. Puigdemont has benefited from the amnesty law as regards to holding a referendum, but the Supreme Court has ruled that his alleged misuse of public funds used to finance the referendum was not covered by the amnesty law. And we're waiting to see who is going to win that legal battle. Puigdemont and his allies claim that the amnesty law includes the misuse of public funds, and certain parts of the judiciary take another point of view, and that hasn't been resolved yet, which is one reason why there's still an arrest warrant for him. And if he were to return to Catalonia tomorrow, he would be arrested, although my theory is that the government is quite happy that he came to Barcelona and managed to go back to Belgium without being picked up by the police, because that would have made him some kind of martyr. He came and went very successfully in the boot or the backseat of a car. One thing I don't understand about his party is why on earth Puigdemont is still leading it. I mean, I would have thought that there was some kind of coup d'etat against him by now, because he's really done. It's a conservative, pro-business party, and he's not done the business sector any favours by this push for independence. But there he is, he still remains. The financing deal, as I've said, which was agreed in order for the socialists to return to power in Catalonia after 14 years, backed by a more pragmatic Catalan party, would see Catalonia becoming autonomous in collecting and managing all the taxes levied by the state through its own tax agency. I'm nearly finished. This probably means exiting the common system which exists in Spain, which basically amounts to the richer regions put money into a pot which helps to sort of level up the poorer regions. This, according to who you believe, Catalonia, which represents 20% of Spain's GDP and is the main exporting region, etc., etc., if they're not putting so much money into the pot, unless we're being told something we don't know about, it stands to reason that poorer regions like Andalusia and Extremadura are going to get less money. But I say it's all up for negotiations. Critics on the political right and some regional socialist leaders say that this deal clashes with the system of solidarity, where poorer regions receive a portion of the revenues of the more affluent regions, such as Catalonia. One expert recently quipped that as a result of this deal, the poorer regions would now be supporting Catalonia. Catalan nationalists have long claimed the region is underfinanced, but the latest figures do not bear this out. The region receives slightly more than the average financing per per citizen in 2022 and just above the average for the 15 regions. The other two being the Basque Country and Navarra, which have their own system. Valencia and Murcia, for example, are far worse off financially than Catalonia. The Catalan socialist Josep Borrell, the outgoing EU foreign policy chief, who wrote a book in 2015 dismantling the separatist mantra that, quote, Spain robs us, said the pact assumes post-mortem the narrative of the process, which is the Catalan term for the independence movement, and is a paradigm change in the financing system. He crossed swords with the socialist finance minister when he compared the deal to the arrangements in the Basque Country and Navarra, with the minister saying that this is not the case. But all the information we have so far leads one to believe that they are going to get a similar deal. Successive governments have talked of reforming the financing system for years. Many agree it needs to change, but they fear opening a Pandora's box of competing demands. Reforming the system through an agreement with just one of the regions, i.e. Catalonia, in my view, is not the most appropriate way. According to the latest survey, published after May's elections in Catalonia, 40% of Catalans are in favour of independence, down from a peak of 43% in 2017, and 53% are against. The poll on Catalans' preferences for the relations with Spain, which better reflects sentiment, as it is not binary, it's not are you in favour, are you against, puts support for independence at 34%, 31% for keeping it as an autonomous region like it is now, 22% for making it a state within federal Spain, and 7% for a region within Spain, not autonomous. While the Catalan independence movement has lost momentum and support, a left-wing coalition descended from the political wing of the defunct terrorist group ETA is on the rise in the Basque Country. EH Bildu won 1/3 of the total vote in the Basque elections in April, and 27 of the 75 seats in the region's parliament. With this, they achieved for the first time the same number of seats as the Basque Nationalist Party, which has ruled the region for most of the time since the Basque Statute of Autonomy in 1978. Last but not least, 10 years after the abdication of King Juan Carlos due to ill health and financial and personal irregularities, I'll leave it at that, the heated debate among the left on keeping the monarchy as reinstated by Franco or restoring a republic, the Second Republic was established in 1931, was crushed during the Civil War, has abated. Juan Carlos has been in a kind of self-imposed exile since 2020 in Abu Dhabi. According to my information, because a couple of my friends have had lunch with him recently, he will be quickly flown to Spain if his health takes a major turn for the worse, as too many Spanish monarchs have died in exile, including Juan Carlos's grandfather, Alfonso XIII, who went into exile shortly before the Second Republic was declared. But otherwise, Juan Carlos is likely to stay where he is and continue with the occasional visit to Spain so he can sail with his friends in Galicia. The exemplary life of Juan Carlos's son, Felipe VI, who inherited a toxic situation from his father, has restored trust in the institution. And I should say here that Felipe is the honorary president of the think tank I work for, in case anyone thinks I'm producing propaganda on his behalf. In a country so sharply polarised and politically fragmented, the non-partisan monarchy, albeit an apparently anachronistic institution in the 21st century, serves Spain better, in my view, than a republic, by standing above the fray and acting as a symbol of unity by not being identified with any political party. I personally don't want either Zapatero or Aznar to be president of Spain. It is striking that many of the most prosperous, and this is generally not known, and democratic countries in the world are parliamentary monarchies. Of the 24 countries classified as full democracies in the latest democracy index of the Economist Intelligence Unit, and one of the 24 is Spain, 8 are parliamentary monarchies. And if you look at the UN's Human Development Index, 9 of the top 30 countries are parliamentary monarchies. A change in the form of state will not resolve the country's fundamental problems and could, history suggests, even exacerbate them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, William, for an extremely thorough and incisive take on Spain's problems. I'm going to open up to the floor for some Q&A, and I think I will take prerogative by kicking it off, actually. But been a pretty gloomy speech, I have to say. I mean, I was just trying to think of any kind of up you might have given, and it came, of course.
The economy's going well.
It came with your hat on for the monarchy, but I'm not going to dispute that. I mean, those of us who are in the UK working as hard as we can on bilateral relations, what we believe in quite a lot on is this soft diplomacy and culture. I just thought. Would like to ask you sort of something which you haven't mentioned, the positives of Spanish culture as it's come back into fore since Franco's time and with Transición, but possibly the more negative side of, if you can call it culture, which plays into this toxic, confrontational political scene, which you've so accurately described, of the media, and you know how you see the media feeding into this toxic, confrontational politics, and whether you see any solution to that. But on the more positive side, think of the culture that comes from Spain to this city, which is probably the most cultural city in the world, and is embraced as, in many ways, as huge example of music, of literature, of food, of gastronomy. Could you just say a little bit about that, just to lift our spirits?
Yeah. Well, the reason that that issue, amongst many others, were not mentioned was because, remember, the title of my talk is The Challenges of Spain. So soft power is not a challenge for Spain because it is already doing extremely well. At the Elcano Institute, we, some years ago, pioneered a very successful global presence index, which has now been going for probably about 10 or 12 years, and it's made up of various elements, and we established this index. I'm not involved in it, but I mean, I know more or less what I'm talking about. And soft power is one of the elements. Soft power is an actually separate part of the index, and all gets very complicated. But what I'm trying to say is that on the soft power element, measured by the kind of things you're talking about and other things, Spain shines. And it's one reason why Spain, and we cover something like 70 odd countries, if not more, in this index. Spain's ranked 12th, which is probably punching above its weight. And a large part of that, its position in the index, is due to the soft power element, which is just one of several elements. There's a military element as well, there's an economic element. And so I agree with exactly what you're saying. I didn't want to plough anyone into sort of, black depressions, but I thought, since I was speaking about the challenges, which almost by definition, while speaking of challenges, one gets into what can be called negative territory. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a challenge, would it?
Could you say something about the media?
Yeah, well, on the media, I'm out of touch with the UK, basically, but it seems to me that if I read a story in ABC and in El País, it's as if they're talking about different countries. If I read a story in the Daily Telegraph and the FT, I can also possibly be reading about two different countries, although the newspapers are from the same country. So, and also this tendency to view Spain through the eyes of Madrid. I know that Jorge Semprún, when he was a marvellous culture minister, always used to get annoyed about, Spain isn't just Madrid. Go out, see the rest of the country. And it's and the media. Madrid is a very media-dominated city. I don't know how some of the newspapers and magazines survive, but they do. We have far more magazines, for example, than the UK has or ever will have. And they whip things up. But then, so does the Daily Mail over Boris Johnson, who's still regarded as some kind of hero.
Thank you very much, William. I'm going to throw it over to Rod. Just one final kind of counterpoint to yours. You mentioned about Spain's role in the world, obviously, compared to what it was like in Franco's time. But it is a fact, isn't it? If one remembers, and I'm not an apologist or indeed defender of the PP or indeed Aznar, but to go from a time when you had Tony Blair, Aznar, and the President of the United States in a summit to a league table of who's supporting Ukraine, and Spain's nowhere there in terms of military kit or even diplomatic muscle. Questions what are the priorities in terms of European security of the Spanish government?
Well, one reason why it's not particularly militarily heavily committed to Ukraine is that Spain's defence budget as a percentage of GDP is one of the lowest, if not the lowest. We're still, top of my head, we're about 1% of GDP gets spent on defence, and I think that the target is 3%, isn't it, of countries?
Which is a member of NATO.
Yeah. So it has done. It is. The government probably claimed that, given within its constraints of money spending, it has done not that badly, but compared to many other countries, it pales in comparison. We've had figures keep changing, but Spain's been pretty generous to Ukrainian refugees arriving. Even in my own village, I live in Madrid, but I also have a house out in the province of Cuenca, which has a resident population of around 300. Not now, because they've gone back possibly to Ukraine or gone elsewhere. We had several families with kids in our village, and the mayor drove personally with one of his sidekicks to Ukraine and brought them back. So Spain is a generous country. One can see that. My lower statistics, I think we're still number one in the world as regards donating organs.
We're getting more positive as the let me. Yeah, sorry. At least we've got smiles on your face. But so let's take some questions. This isn't Big Brother, but it's always good to, if you can, and volunteer, identify who you are and where you're coming from. And keep your questions as questions, not as huge political statements or counter commentaries. The man with the glasses over there.
Hi. My name is Michael. I'm American-Israeli, and I'm interested in understanding the difference between the UK and the Spanish, response to the war, and also, Spain's recognition of Palestine and why it differs from other powers in Europe.
Well, I can't make any comparison of the powers. It's not something I follow closely, but it is true that in the Israeli government's eyes, Spain has become, well, when I say Spain, the government has become sort of persona non grata. Sanchez is one of the, you correct me if I'm wrong, was one of the first to talk about ceasefire and all this kind of stuff. As for me to compare it to the UK's position is impossible because I don't cover
What was behind the scenes? Why do you think Spain supported?
Well, Spain has always been, as we've had Palestinian representation in Spain for many years, a kind of embassy there. We are a country that has a fairly turbulent past, and I suspect if you did a sort of pacifist ranking, Spain emerges pretty high on a pacifist ranking, which may explain why, for example, spending more on defence is a politically sensitive issue in Spain, not particularly in the UK. All those things factor into, as now went ahead backing the, slightly changing here, but it tells you something, backing the Iraq war in the face of monumental, overwhelming opposition in the public to that war. But he went ahead and did it. Sanchez, maybe, we could say, is more attuned to how the populace feels. And there again we're back with the media. Spain, the TV coverage of the Gaza war and Beirut stuff, I think has been quite objective. My wife and I could barely watch more than 1 minute of the news before she sort of tears well up in her eyes when she sees all the kids. You know the stuff I'm talking about.
Any more questions? The gentleman over here, the gentleman with the dark, this gentleman here with the beard.
Yes, I would consider the recognition of Palestine as a positive, but going back to the challenges.
Could you identify yourself?
Yes, my name is Victor and I am from the Canary Islands. So, with a youth unemployment rate of 25%, to what extent can it be claimed that the Spanish economy needs massive migration? Isn't that a kind of sugar rush to which big business is addicted, and it's fueling the growth of the extreme right, and as in the rest of Europe, it's chipping away at the foundations of the EU?
Well, it depends what jobs one was talking about. Back again to what I was talking about, Spain having a lopsided education system. So we have a lot of kids who are poorly qualified to do the jobs that Spain needs. And on the other end, we have graduates who don't fulfill their ambitions despite having a degree in whatever. For example, talking of the Canary Islands, your home area, most of those people coming there, and this might sound politically incorrect, are not the kind of people that Spain needs to, they're not going to find jobs, basically, except in agriculture, maybe. But we already have enough immigrants working in agriculture. We have received, I don't think off the top of my head, something like 6 million immigrants in the last 20 years or so. We still have a high unemployment rate. It's 12%. Bear in mind, the lowest unemployment rate we've ever had in Spain is 8%, and that was regarded as something phenomenal. That was 2008, and that was due to booming construction. Double, that 8% is double the UK's present rate. I'm not really answering your point because I'm sort of grasping at various different issues. But it's a very strange labour market in Spain. There are, it is true, various employers who are looking to reduce labour costs, who are looking for particular skills, engineers, for example. Many of Spain's best engineers, young adults, came to UK. That now is closed off. Well, it can still come here, but not automatically and as easily as in the past. They can go to other countries, but the UK was a very popular place for, shall we say, the best educated Spaniards. That said, there were also many people who came here and took jobs in hotels. Spain does need, because of its aging population, it does need more workers. And it's, to be fair, a bit like in England, although we have very low unemployment here, there are a large number of Spaniards who are not prepared to work in certain sectors. I mean, why do the Moroccans dominate, and I would hate to do that job, working under plastic in Almeria? Because no Spaniard wants that job. But it's a very lucrative business, it's a major exporter, and they are prepared in the most awful temperatures to sweat away and do those jobs. Just as, correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't lived in the UK for 40 years, there were parts of the UK where agriculture is rotted because Brits are not prepared to work there. So this probably doesn't answer your question.
Thank you, William. The gentleman here with the white jogging.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm from Avila. I'm a dual citizen as well. My question is, in May last year, the PP, well, the PSOE had a terrible local election. 2 months later, Sanchez somehow remains Prime Minister. How did Feijóo survive as leader of the PP? I just can't wrap my head around. In the UK, they would have got rid of Feijóo. In my mind, he lost the election more than anything else.
Well, there's a precedent for that. Don't forget, Mariano Rajoy lost several elections, still remained as leader of the opposition.
So, well, why not? Why is there not this culture of getting rid of leaders? I mean, Casado went.
You could argue the good and the bad points of that. I mean, do you want to keep changing your leaders? If a party thinks it's got a good leader, but he hasn't won election, case of Rajoy, case of Feijóo, but they still think he's still got the party's support, why throw him out and bring in some unknown person who's probably may do no better, or he may do better, we don't know. Why take the risk? I mean, I think Rajoy is the outstanding example there. You know, he stayed there and eventually he won. I mean,
A bit of a contrast with the British Conservative Party.
well, exactly.
Anyway, other questions?
Yeah.
Have we got? I'm not being, politically correct, but can we have some women asking questions? Any women want to ask some questions? Okay, the lady here. The lady, can you pass?
I'll pass it to the lady.
Can you pass?
Good lesson. I'm Bea Brown, also a dual citizen. I'm interested in the UK so far. The far right has not captured the youth vote, but we're seeing that it has in a lot of other European countries. I wonder if you could comment on the relationship between the far right or either far extreme and the youth vote, bearing in mind 25%.
Well, until the emergence of Vox, your disaffected young adults, I'm not going to understand why, particularly if they were unemployed, voted for want of a better word, hard left parties. I mean, we still, well, not the Spanish Communist Party didn't dissolve that long ago. It was Podemos, then became Unidas Podemos, and the Unida came from Izquierda Unida, which was the revamped Communist Party. Vox successfully has taken away votes from the hard left. Both extremes, how can I put this? I think you can move from fascism to communism quite easily. And I'm not saying Spain proves that point, but I think you can. And I'm not saying that everyone who votes for Vox is a fascist, or everyone who votes for Sumar is an outright communist. Although the leader of Sumar is, she recognises herself as, but she comes from an old working class communist family, dad heavily involved in workers' commissions in Galicia. So the some political scientists have done a breakdown of Vox's vote, and a reasonably significant proportion of the votes come from the young, who see Podemos, which has sort of disappeared. Well, it's become Sumar basically. Probably hasn't fulfilled their expectations of what they do. They came in on a great rise of popularity, the movimiento de los indignados and all this kind of stuff, and they came in and maybe began to be seen as just another party, in it for themselves, nothing's changed. Okay, so along comes hard right party. Oh, let's give them a chance. And they're clever in their messages, and they're cleverer than the hard left in social media. Putting out messages of that's like immigrants particularly. I mean, for example, quite recently, Vox was putting out that most of the crime is committed by immigrants, and it was very easy to disprove that figure. Get the statistics, and then you say, well, what percentage of the population is immigrant, and they're responsible for this amount of crime, which initially looks quite high, but then you realise you compare it to Spaniards, and it's all put in perspective. And that has been doing the round. I noticed in El País today that amongst Spaniards' concerns, which generally are unemployment, education, immigration is rising up the list of the main concerns, more than actually any other issue.
I'm going to take a question from our live stream public in a minute. But first, Geoffrey Cowling, former Consul General in Barcelona.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. But as I was Consul General in Barcelona, albeit 20 years ago, my question is really on Catalonia, because you did mention the possibility, well, look, one of the things that's always been demanded is a proper referendum for Catalonia. I remember demonstrations years ago where they were saying, som una nación, nosotros decidimos, and that still goes on. But as you say, the support for independence would appear to be dropping to the sort of 40-60 line. Now, would you not think that a confident Spain at this time might say, okay, have your referendum, and on the present thing, it would probably fail, and therefore that boil that is always on the body politic of Spain would perhaps be lanced, and it would go away. There will always be people who want to be independent, of course, the same in Scotland, but the number of seats is absolutely planted. But do you not think that might be a
to do it, you'd have to change the constitution. To change the constitution, you have to have 2/3 support in the parliament. You then have to have a referendum on the change, and you then have to have a general election on that. That's to change the constitution, which would allow a referendum. You can't just say, Sanchez can't wake up, even if he wanted to, and say, we're having a referendum tomorrow. The justice system will be all over him.
Okay, so it will fester on for years and years.
Yeah, it will fester on for years and years.
Well, there is no solution.
So, but then at the same time, there are a reasonably large number of Spaniards who are so fed up with Catalonia, said, let them have, excuse my language, a fucking referendum, and we'll solve the problem. Either way. Another argument, does a central government want to take the risk of having a... Look at referendums. I mean, they're dangerous things to have. Look at the Brexit referendum.
Yeah. Switzerland gets away with it.
And people vote for the wrong reasons. I have 2 nieces who live in Oxfordshire. One voted in favour of Brexit because of the public health waiting list, which has nothing to do with Brexit. The other one voted because of education problems. Nothing to do with Brexit. They now both are in deep repentance.
Okay, let's move. The question, one of the questions we've had come in, I think the gentleman here addressed, which is to do with Sanchez's circular migration framework, but its application to the labour market. But this is rather an interesting one for you, William. I have a question. Do you feel that Spain is not selling itself correctly internationally when it comes to fact-checking? For example, Morocco became a country in 1956 yet they pushed the narrative that they have been around for millennia, yet it wasn't Morocco. Another example, the Catalan argument of having been a nation, which again they never were, it was Aragon.
Yeah, well, anyone who's read John Eliot's book, Comparing Catalonia and Scotland, which was a very good book, will know that Catalonia and the Basque nationalists have been very clever in, rewriting history. I mean, I don't know whether there are any Catalan independent supporters here, but if I was to stand up and say Catalonia has never been a nation, if I said that in Barcelona, I'd quite likely be lynched by a certain segment of the population. And yet, once I take Eliot as an authority on this, it hasn't ever been a nation, as we understand nations today. So, talking about fact-checking, one of the sad things about the Sanchez's government's amnesty was not so much the amnesty law itself, which one could say has diffused the issue to some extent, was the text they drew up announcing the amnesty, which pretty well totally bought the Catalan independence narrative of, why we are where we are and we've been persecuted and that kind of stuff. If you didn't have to read too much between the lines. And that, I thought was quite shocking.
Thank you. Edmund Fawcett, I'm a Londoner. Alas, I have only British citizenship. You were very clear about the fragmentation of the party system. I think you'd agree that that isn't itself a sign of a weakening of democracy. Is there anything the opinion polling shows about general public confidence in Spanish democracy and its basic institutions?
Yeah, I had a line in saying that public trust in Spain, public trust of Spaniards in politicians is among the lowest in the EU.
It's slightly, it's not in politicians, and you
well,
I'm
you're
talking
the
about
system.
the system. Because
How you were defining the system?
well, I mean, there are polls in Britain, for example, showing that confidence in confidence in the democratic system has dropped, and I think that's common elsewhere in the United States. It's not just about politicians, but about the texture and strength of
the colonisation of many state institutions by political parties. It's jobs for the boys, and the PP is just as bad as the socialists on this. Each party, when it's opposition, says it will change the system, and when it's in power, it never does. That is becoming increasingly, Spaniards are becoming increasingly aware about that. There's a new organisation in Spain called I Derecho, and also Clegg's wife is involved in pushing pro-democracy. She's got some institution going, it's quite new, which is quite similar to this organisation called I Derecho, pointing out things which could be, which need to be improved. I mean, why should, and I think I'm right, thinking of the right person, the former person in charge of Sanchez's gabinete, his office in Moncloa, be put in to run the post office, and he's made an absolute bloody mess of it. Why?
Okay, I'm going to take one more question
Yeah,
and then close the session. Okay, he's already in there. Okay.
Thank you very much, first of all, to the Institute of Cervantes and British Spanish Society and William for this lecture this evening.
No, can you speak into the microphone?
First of all, thank you both societies and Instituto and to yourself for this lecture tonight. My name is Joseph Secon. I'm not Spanish, I'm a British person from Birmingham. I was wondering what you might think of a phenomenon that was written about by a young author whose book I can't endorse because I haven't read it. It's called Feria, about the emptying out of rural Spain.
Oh, okay, yes, that's Spania Vaciana.
I was wondering what challenge do you think that poses for the future of Spain itself?
Well, there are large swathes of provinces like Soria, large parts of Castilla y Leon, which have amongst the lowest population density figures in all of Europe. One part of, I think its story is known as the Spanish Siberia, because not only is it so cold, so only is famously cold in the winter, but no one lives there. So yeah, this has been a gradual process of people moving out. It basically became known to the general public as a result of a book written by Sergio del Molino, someone I know quite well, which was called La España Vacía. Some people call it La España Vaciada, because it's essentially being emptied out as opposed to empty. When emptied out, you get the feeling of people are going, leaving. Some parts of the country, you can buy a whole village for less than you could buy, less than you could buy my house in Madrid. There's always, the successive governments have tried to encourage people, particularly immigrants. There are some examples, but they're not very significant. Why don't they go and repopulate these areas, help repopulate areas? But no, they want to go to Bilbao, Barcelona, Malaga, Madrid, where the jobs are. They don't want to go to some rinky-dink village in Surrey and become a shepherd. Incidentally, talking of sheep, in my own village, we've always had a succession of shepherds until the last one retired. No one in the village wanted the job. He found a Moroccan to do the job, and then discovered that Moroccan actually had another job. And what he would do was he'd take the sheep out, go and do his other job, and then come back and hope he could find the sheep.
That's a wonderful note to end on. I'm sure there's an allegory there about Spain. Look, William, thanks a million for your time. It's been an excellent talk, and also to you lot for asking such prescient questions. I'd just like to end on a note of, again, an up note really. One is keep supporting the Cervantes. And those of you who don't know about the British Spanish Society, Lisa Chambers over there is our membership secretary. So, sign up to this incredibly important charity. We do great events. We produce a very good magazine. And we're a very good punto de encuentro, which is our favourite motto between people. I also wanted to say, in deference to my Catalan friends, I'm not an independentista, but I've got a house in Sitges, which is the most multicultural, multisexual town I've ever lived in. Beautifully cultured, beautiful sea, and you'll be most welcome there, and you will not be bashed up if you say that Catalonia is not a nation. So I'll leave you on that note.